I took care of her. I paid her bills. I showed up every single time she called. And then one morning, my daughter called the police and told them I had stolen her house. I'm not going to dress this up. My name is Bernard. I'm 64 years old. I live in Dayton, Ohio, and I spent 11 years of my life rebuilding everything my daughter destroyed. I'm telling this story because I still wake up at 3 in the morning sometimes and stare at the ceiling and think, how close did I come to losing it all? How close did I come to dying in a county jail cell while my grandchildren sat in a stranger's house? Pretty close. That's the answer. Pretty close. My daughter's name is Renee. She was my only child. Her mother passed when Renee was 9, breast cancer, fast and brutal, and after that, it was just the two of us. I worked construction most of my life, project supervisor by the time I was 40, and I made sure Renee had everything she needed. Good school, orthodontist, soccer camp in the summers. I wasn't a perfect father. I worked too much, I know that. But I was there. I was always there. She married young, 22. His name was Damon, and I knew within 10 minutes of meeting him that he was going to be a problem. Not because he was mean to her, not at first. Just, there was something behind his eyes that didn't sit right with me. A kind of restlessness, like he was always calculating something. They had 2 kids in 3 years, a boy, then a girl. When my grandson was born, I drove 4 hours each way to be at the hospital. When my granddaughter came, I stayed for 2 weeks and cooked every meal in that house. I wasn't just a grandfather. I was invested. Deeply, completely invested. The marriage started falling apart when the kids were still small. Damon lost his job at the logistics company, then had a short stint at a car dealership, then nothing for 8 months. Renee was waitressing double shifts and I was sending money when I could. 200 here, 300 there. I never kept track. I should have. I didn't, because she was my daughter and you don't keep a ledger on your own child. Then Damon left. Just gone one Tuesday morning. Left a note on the kitchen table. Renee called me screaming and I drove those 4 hours in 3.5. I found her sitting on the floor of the living room with both kids crying around her. And she looked at me and she said, "Dad, I can't do this." I said, "You don't have to. Come home." She thought about it for 3 days. Then she loaded the kids and 2 suitcases into her car and drove to Dayton. That was 11 years ago. My grandchildren were 4 and 2. The first year was hard, but we managed. I was still working then, finishing up a big commercial project in Springfield. Renee would watch the kids while I was gone, and I'd take over evenings and weekends. We found a rhythm. The house was loud in a way it hadn't been since her mother was alive, and I won't pretend I didn't love that. Waking up to cereal on the table and cartoons too loud on the TV and small feet running down the hall, I loved every second of it. But Renee was restless. I could see it. She'd always been chasing something she couldn't quite name, and Damon walking out hadn't fixed that. It had made it worse. She started going out on weekends. At first it was just dinner with a girlfriend. Then it was bars. Then I started noticing she wouldn't come home until 2 or 3 in the morning, and the kids would be up at 7 asking where their mama was, and I'd tell them she was sleeping and make them pancakes and try to fill the space. I didn't say anything for months. I didn't want to push her away. But one Sunday morning, I found her crying in the kitchen at 5 a.m., and she told me she had met someone. A man named, she said his name, but it doesn't matter now. What matters is what she said next. She said, "He lives in Phoenix, Dad. He wants me to come out there." I asked about the kids. She didn't answer right away. That pause was the answer. "Dad," she said, "you're so good with them. You're better at this than I ever was." I told her that wasn't true. I told her they needed their mother. She left 8 days later, kissed both kids goodbye, told them she'd send for them soon, hugged me for a long time in the driveway. I stood there watching her taillights until I couldn't see them anymore. And then I went inside and sat at the kitchen table for a while before my grandson came downstairs and climbed into my lap and said, "Grandpa, where did Mama go?" "She went on a trip, buddy," I said. "She'll call soon." She did call. For the first few months, she called every week, then every 2 weeks, then once a month. Then the calls started coming maybe 4 or 5 times a year, usually around birthdays or Christmas. I stopped expecting them after a while, and so did the kids. You can only wait so long before waiting becomes something else. I retired at 60. By then my granddaughter was 13 and my grandson was 15. They had both grown up in my house, in the school district 3 blocks away, with my neighbors and my routines and my cooking. I make a pork roast on Sundays that my grandson says is the reason he hasn't moved out. He graduated high school in that house. His sister was headed to community college. I had used most of my savings and a significant portion of my retirement fund over those years. Not complaining, I'd do it again, but the truth is I was not a wealthy man. I owned a house free and clear, paid it off in 2019, and I had about $60,000 in a retirement account and Social Security starting in a couple of years. That was my plan. Modest, honest, mine. Then one February morning, my phone rang. It was Renee. Not a birthday call, not Christmas. February, out of nowhere, and her voice was different, clipped, formal, like she'd rehearsed what she was going to say. She said she was back in Ohio. She said she'd gotten sober, which told me things had gone badly in Phoenix, though she didn't say so directly. She said she wanted to reconnect with the kids. I said that was fine. I said they were adults now. They could make their own choices about that. Then she said something that made the room tilt a little. She said, "Dad, I've been talking to someone, a legal advisor, and I think there are some things we need to straighten out about the house." I asked her what she meant. She said, "Well, it was Mom's house originally, and when Mom passed, some of that equity should have come to me. I just want to make sure everything is documented properly." I kept my voice calm. I told her the house had been mine since 1991, that her mother and I had bought it together, and that when her mother passed, I had become the sole owner. Everything legal, everything documented. I told her she was welcome to look at any paperwork she wanted. She said she'd be in touch. 2 weeks later, I got a certified letter from an attorney's office in Columbus. It said that Renee was filing a civil claim asserting that she had a rightful interest in the property at my address based on her late mother's original contribution to the purchase, and that I had, over the years, allegedly pressured her to abandon her parental rights and vacate the family home in order to consolidate control of the asset. I read that sentence 4 times. She was claiming I had pushed her out, that I had manipulated her into leaving so I could keep the house. I sat down on the couch and the room was very quiet. My grandson was at work. He was doing HVAC training. My granddaughter was at class. I was alone in the house my wife and I had picked out together in 1991, the house I had paid for and painted and repaired and heated for 33 years, and someone was trying to take it from me with a piece of paper. I called my neighbor. His name is Art, 71, retired postal worker, built like a refrigerator, known me since the kids were small. Art had watched Renee leave. He'd watched me raise those 2 children. If there was one man on earth who knew the truth of what had happened in my house, it was Art. I drove over and handed him the letter. He read it twice and then looked at me over his reading glasses and said, "Bernard, you need a lawyer. Today." I told him my name wasn't Bernard. He laughed. Old joke between us. I found an attorney, a real estate and family law attorney named, it doesn't matter. She was good, I'll call her my attorney. I brought her everything. The deed, the mortgage payoff records, 11 years of tax returns with my grandchildren listed as dependents, school enrollment forms signed by me, medical consent forms, dental records, every piece of paper I had kept in a blue accordion folder in my filing cabinet because I was raised to keep records. My attorney went quiet for a moment after going through the folder. Then she said, "This is a strong case, but I want to warn you, civil cases like this can drag on and they're expensive." I asked her what she thought Renee's angle was. She paused. Then she said, "I think someone told her she might have a claim, and she believed them. But I also think there may be a financial motive we should look into." She was right. There was. What I found out over the next month through my attorney and through some conversations with people who knew Renee in Columbus was this: she had come back from Phoenix with nothing. The man she had followed out there had left her too. She'd had some kind of breakdown, gotten sober through a church program, and was now living in a rented room. Someone, I don't know if it was a friend or a predatory legal consultant or just a bad idea she had at 2 in the morning, had told her that her mother's name had been on the original deed and that she might be entitled to something. My wife's name had been on the deed in 1991, when we bought the house together. When she died in 2004, the property transferred entirely to me through right of survivorship. This was not complicated. This was not ambiguous. It was documented 6 ways from Sunday. But Renee had found an attorney willing to file the claim anyway. These attorneys exist. They take cases on contingency and throw things at the wall, and sometimes they get a settlement because the defendant is scared or tired or just wants it to be over. I was not going to be that defendant. The court date was set for April. In the weeks leading up to it, things got worse. Renee's attorney sent a secondary filing, this one claiming that by raising the children without a formal custody arrangement, I had essentially interfered with the parent-child relationship and created a situation that had caused Renee ongoing emotional harm. She was saying that me taking care of her kids had hurt her. I read that and I actually laughed. Not a funny laugh. The other kind. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't find out until later, was that Renee had also called my grandson and told him that I had turned her away when she tried to come home, that I had blocked her from seeing her own children, that I had poisoned them against her. My grandson called me that night. He was upset in a way I hadn't heard from him since he was small. He said, "Grandpa, is any of what she's saying true?" I told him to come over. He came over and I sat him down at the kitchen table and I told him everything. The morning she left, the phone calls that got less and less frequent, the time she was supposed to visit and didn't show, the birthday cards that stopped coming when he was 9. I didn't editorialize, I just told him the facts. He sat there for a long time after I finished. Then he said, "I was there for most of that. I remember." "I know you were," I said. He said, "I'll testify. If you need me to, I'll testify." I told him I didn't want him put in that position. He said he was 20 years old and he could decide for himself what position he was put in. That kid. I cannot explain what it felt like to have him say that. Here's the thing about 11 years of paperwork. It tells a story, a complete, boring, irrefutable story. My attorney subpoenaed school records going back to 2013. She pulled the medical records showing me as emergency contact and legal guardian for both children from the time they were toddlers. She found the utility bills, the grocery receipts I'd kept for tax purposes, the church directory with my name listed under my grandchildren's family unit. And then there was Art. Art had been there, not just as a neighbor. He had driven my grandson to the ER in 2016 when he broke his arm at school and I was on a job site. He had sat with my granddaughter through a panic attack during finals. He had fed the kids dinner at his table probably 100 times. When my attorney asked him if he would be willing to provide a sworn affidavit, he said, "Give me the paper and a pen." The day before the court date, Renee's attorney called mine and offered a settlement. They were asking for $40,000 and they were framing it as a good faith resolution. $40,000 from a man on a fixed income. My attorney called me and asked what I wanted to do. I said I wanted to walk into that courtroom. The hearing was on a Tuesday morning. I wore the same blazer I had worn to my grandson's high school graduation. I sat next to my attorney, and across the room I could see Renee sitting with her lawyer, and I realized I hadn't seen her in person in almost 4 years. She looked older. She looked tired. Part of me still felt something when I looked at her. She was still my daughter. She always would be. But I was not going to give her my house. The judge was a woman, probably mid-50s, and she had clearly read every page of the filing before she walked into the room. She asked Renee's attorney to walk her through the basis of the property claim. He did. It was thin, and he knew it was thin, and it showed. Then my attorney presented the deed transfer documentation, the survivorship records, and 33 years of property tax payments in my name alone. The judge asked Renee's attorney a question I had not expected her to ask. She said, "Counselor, are you aware that your client left minor children in this man's care for a period of over 10 years without a custody agreement, without financial contribution, and without consistent contact?" The attorney started to answer. The judge held up a hand. She turned to where my grandson was sitting in the gallery. He had come on his own. I hadn't asked him to. And she said, "Young man, would you like to say something to this court?" He stood up. He was wearing his work clothes, still had a little grease on one hand from the shop. He said, "Yes, ma'am." And then he said, simply, quietly, without drama, that he had grown up in my house. That his grandfather had taken him to every doctor's appointment and every school play and every baseball practice for as long as he could remember. That his mother had been absent for most of his childhood. That he was not saying this to be cruel. He was saying it because it was true. The courtroom was quiet when he finished. The judge looked at the papers in front of her for a moment. Then she said, "This claim has no legal merit. The property transfer upon Mrs. Sis, she named my late wife, is properly documented and unambiguous. The plaintiff's claim is dismissed." She also said something I didn't expect. She said that given the nature of the secondary filing, the one claiming emotional harm from my raising the children, she was referring the matter to the Bar Association for review of the attorney's conduct. Filing a claim that frivolous, she said, warranted scrutiny. I don't know what happened to Renee's attorney after that. I hope it was something uncomfortable. I walked out of that courthouse at 11:15 in the morning, and Art was waiting on a bench outside. He had driven 40 minutes to be there, even though I told him he didn't have to. I sat down next to him, and for a minute, neither of us said anything. Then he said, "So?" I said, "Dismissed." He nodded slowly, looked out at the parking lot. Then he said, "You want to get lunch?" We got lunch. I had the patty melt. He had the soup. We talked about baseball for 20 minutes, and it was the best conversation I'd had in months. My granddaughter called that evening. She'd been in class during the hearing, and my grandson had texted her the moment we walked out. She was crying when I picked up, the good kind of crying. And she kept saying, "Grandpa, I'm so sorry you had to go through that." And I told her to stop apologizing for things she didn't do. Renee never called after the ruling. Not that week, not that month. I don't know where she is now. My grandchildren have her number. If they want to have a relationship with her, that's their choice, and I will support them in it and say nothing either way. She is still their mother. That is a fact that doesn't change regardless of what she did. But here is what I know. I know that my wife and I saved for 18 months to make the down payment on that house. I know that we painted every room ourselves on a long weekend in October 1991, and she chose a yellow for the kitchen that I thought was too bright and then lived with happily for 20 years. I know that I shoveled that driveway and mowed that lawn and fixed the furnace twice and replaced the water heater and refinished the back porch and raised 2 children in it who turned into people I am proud of. No piece of paper filed in a Columbus attorney's office was ever going to take that from me, not without a fight. My grandson is finishing his HVAC certification in June. He's already got a job offer from a company in Dayton. He's going to stay in the area. My granddaughter is thinking about transferring to a 4-year program, nursing maybe, or education. She hasn't decided. She asks my opinion on everything and then makes her own decision, which is exactly what she should do. On Sundays, I still make the pot roast. The house smells the way it has always smelled, like a home that has been lived in by people who loved each other, even through the hard parts, especially through the hard parts. I am 64 years old, and I have nothing to prove to anyone anymore. But if you ever come for what is mine, I will show up with a blue accordion folder full of 30 years of receipts, and I will not settle, and I will not back down, and I will sit in that courtroom for as long as it takes. That's not a threat, that's just who I am. I think about that blue accordion folder a lot. Not because it saved me, though it did, but because of what it represents. I didn't keep those records because I knew one day I'd need them in a courtroom. I kept them because that's what a responsible person does. That's what my father taught me. You pay your bills, you file your papers, you show up when you're supposed to show up. It's not glamorous. Nobody hands you a medal for it. But it's the foundation that holds when everything else tries to collapse. Renee made her choices. I've had months now to sit with that, and I don't say it with bitterness anymore. I say it as a plain fact. Every step in that chain had a cause and an effect. She chose to follow a man to Phoenix instead of staying for her children. That choice created a gap. I stepped into the gap because the kids needed someone to step into it. She chose to listen to bad legal advice when she came back broken and desperate. That choice brought us into a courtroom, and the judge looked at 11 years of documented reality and dismissed the case in under an hour. Not because the universe was being fair, because the truth was right there in writing, undeniable, page after page. What I want people to take from this, and I'm not standing on a soapbox, I'm just an old man from Dayton who's seen a few things, is that the way you live every ordinary day is exactly what protects you on the extraordinary ones. My grandson said something to that judge that I couldn't have scripted if I tried. He stood up in his work clothes with grease on his hand and told the truth simply and without drama. That kind of character doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from years of watching someone model it. I can only hope I modeled it well enough. There's also something to be said for knowing when to fight and how to fight. I was scared when that certified letter arrived. I won't pretend otherwise. But I didn't panic and I didn't fold. I called Art. I found a good attorney. I pulled out the folder and I built my case on facts. Being smart about a hard situation isn't cold. It's how you survive it. Emotions are real and they matter, but they can't be the only thing you bring into a room where someone is trying to take your home. And then there's the staying power. 11 years of school lunches and doctor visits and Sunday pot roast. 11 years of being the person who showed up when the person who was supposed to show up didn't. That's not martyrdom. That's just endurance. The quiet, unglamorous kind that most people never see, but that kids absolutely feel. My granddaughter is thinking about becoming a nurse. My grandson is starting his career. They turned out that way because somebody stayed. I stayed. That's the whole story, really. Everybody left and I stayed. And when it was tested in a courtroom on a Tuesday morning in April, that was enough.